Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another Discover Wildlife evening. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Dan Free, and I'm the General Manager here at Wildlife Worldwide and the Travelling Naturalist. And tonight I'm joined by my good friend and colleague, Bret Charman. Now, I don't like to say it too often, but Bret is an incredibly talented photographer and a very good naturalist as well. And tonight he's going to be talking us through some of his favourite destinations for photography. It promises to be a fantastic evening because Bret really is very, very talented on that front. So we're sure to see some fantastic images. Now, as ever, there will be the opportunity to ask some questions. So if I can request that you post them either in the chat forum or the Q&A forum, we will endeavour to answer them as best as we can. I can probably answer some as we're going along, and if I can't do that, I will put them to Bret at the end of the evening. So we're anticipating the talk taking around 30-40 minutes, and then we'll probably have a further 10-15 minutes for questions at the end of that. As ever, there will also be a poll at the end where there'll be the opportunity to request any of the detailed itineraries, the travel plans for some of the trips which are being featured tonight by Bret. I think that's probably everything, isn't it, from me, really, Bret? It's over to you, really, mate. You good to go?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Okay, right. I'm going to mute myself and make myself disappear, and I'll let you take it away.
Okay, thanks very much. So good evening, everybody. As Dan has alluded to, I'm going to sort of take you to some of my favourite haunts around the world for wildlife photography. It is quite a random mix of destinations, so you'll have to bear with me as I sort of jump around the world a little bit. But hopefully it just gives you an idea of some of the best places, in my eyes anyway, of where you can go and have just amazing photographic experiences, really. So I'm going to start off with somewhere relatively close to home, in the boreal forests of Finland. And I'm sure many of you have been there before. Well, hopefully many of you have been there before. And for those of you that haven't, you should. And it's probably best known for its population of brown bears. But there is an awful lot more on offer than just that. But photographically, the bears are probably the easiest to photograph. They're easily seen, and you can quite quickly build up an array of images, whether it's sort of in the forest or out on open meadows or by ponds and lakes. You sort of name it, you can quite quickly capture some wonderful images. And the great thing about Finland is you're in the hides all night, so you can easily sort of capture images with that changing light. So you can get backlighting, side lighting, sometimes even front lighting, because it can travel all the way around the hides, which is really quite lovely. It is hide based. It's really important to say, and you will spend an entire night in the hides here, but it is worth it, I promise you. And I've had some people come back for multiple encounters with the bears and the other wildlife here as well. But it isn't just about the bears here at all. There's a lot else around, a lot of other wildlife, a lot of other species. And if you're really, really lucky, you might get to see one of these, a European elk. They're particularly elusive, and the best time to see them is on a rainy day. And normally when you're driving to and from the hides is actually the best time. So if you do see one, make sure you shout, well, not shout, whisper to the driver and ask him to stop slowly, and hopefully you can get some amazing shots. It's really lovely when you get them in the rich forest such as this, but sometimes again you'll see them out in the sort of the open meadows and the more swampy areas as well. So there's always slightly different things going on, and it's always worth keeping your eyes peeled. For me though, one of the biggest draws photographing in Finland, other than the bears, are wolverines. These guys are incredibly fierce mammals, the largest member of the mustelid family, and just the only way to describe them really is they are like a badger that is on steroids, and they really just suffer from severe ADHD as well. They just can't stay still, and to photograph them is particularly challenging. When they climb a tree like this, it's a little bit easier because it just enables you to sort of get nice and sort of still moments, particularly when the light levels are low. But it's always a challenge with wildlife is when you need it to cooperate, and particularly with wildlife photography, making sure they stop and they look the right way, and you can frame your picture accordingly. Obviously, I always sort of try and make the composition as appealing as possible, but it's not always that simple when you're working with wild animals, obviously. But the wolverines in Finland, in certain places in particular, are reliable, and you can really capture some stunning images from a number of dedicated hides. So it is well worth putting in the time for this tenacious and rather fierce little mammal. And as you can see, sometimes they get remarkably close. This one was actually taken with a 300mm lens to give you an idea. And as you can see, the head is just coming into bloom as well. So it's a particularly beautiful time to be in the forest, sort of towards the end of summer or early summer as well. Either or are fantastic times to go. But for me, the undoubted highlight here is definitely the wolf. To see a grey wolf in the wild in Europe is a real honour, and I've had people that have come on this trip sort of specifically to tick them off their list, and they've so far, touch wood, never been disappointed. And to see wolves in their natural habitat in Europe is just spellbinding, and to be able to capture photographs of them is even more magical, particularly in landscapes such as this lovely open cotton grass meadow with the pine trees and silver birches scattered around as well. It's a really beautiful place and very atmospheric. And if you're really, really lucky, they will actually come right in front of the hides and you can get these beautiful, stunning portrait shots. You are having to shoot wide open aperture wise, slow shutter speeds, even with long telephoto lenses. So it does require a little bit of patience and persistence, but I can assure you the efforts are well worth it. And they do also come out when the weather is a little bit more cooperative as well. Hopefully when the light's particularly good, sort of early evening, sort of between 8 and 9 p.m. Finland time is a great time to photograph the wolves. And they really are, as you can see, just absolutely stunning mammals. And if you're particularly lucky, you can even capture interactions between the wolves, the bears, and the wolverines. I have seen all three species at once. It's very unusual, but it does happen. But to be able to photograph just two of those species together is pretty amazing. And here you can see a male wolf, actually the alpha male of the pack, a large bear, and another sort of a lone wolf, I guess is the way to put it, in the background, not part of the pack proper, but sort of always on the fringes. So Finland is a fantastic place, particularly if you're looking for amazing species close to home. It's a great way to go, great place to go, and build up a really lovely portfolio in a relatively short period of time. You only need about 4 nights in the hides, and usually with that you can get some fantastic imagery. So from there, I'm going to head basically south, and I'm going to take you to the African continent, which is probably my favorite place on earth. I can rabbit on all day about it, so I'll try not to, I promise. But Manor Pools in particular is one of my favorite haunts, and it's for the African wild dogs. I sort of carried on from Finland to here because of the painted wolf link. I personally call them African wild dogs. I think painted wolves is actually sort of doing them a disservice because the wolf is much maligned across most of the world. So for me, calling them a dog is actually a better way to help the conservation. But anyway, that's beside the point. You're here to photograph them, and Manor Pools is probably among the best places, along with Botswana, to photograph these guys. But the great thing about Manor Pools, and is so different about other places, is that you can photograph them on foot. And being able to get down low as a wildlife photographer is the most important thing, in my opinion. If the lower you can get, the better your imagery. And this just gives you an idea of the opportunities on offer. This is a distance sighting, just to let you know. So I will try and show you a close encounter later on. But the light in Manor Pools as well is absolutely remarkable. And photographers are a particularly fussy bunch. We obviously need the wildlife to cooperate, but we always complain about the light. It's never good enough, or there's too much light. And very rarely do we ever go, oh, the light's perfect right now. And when it is, there's normally no wildlife on offer. So the wild dogs in Manor Pools are remarkable because they have no fear of people on foot. And you can watch them go about their daily business completely relaxed, I suppose is the way to put it. They're not at all bothered by companionship of people. And in actual fact, they seem to quite appreciate you being around because it keeps other predators away. If you're particularly lucky, you get sort of these amazing moments where the light pierces the canopy of the ebony groves that surround sort of the dry river gullies and dry lagoons in Manor Pools. And you can get these beautiful shafts of light coming through. And if you're really, really lucky, you might get some interaction and behavior of the dogs at the same moment. A lot on offer. And to give you an idea of how close you can get, hopefully you can all see the video here. The dogs are walking only, sort of 10 to 15 yards away from a group of that I was leading only a couple of years ago. So it really is a very, very special place indeed. But there's so much more on offer in Manor Pools as well. The great thing about being on foot is you can get down on low and photograph other species. Particularly good to photograph hippos. But when you're photographing the lions, generally you're probably going to be in the vehicles, because if you're out on foot, the lions quite simply usually run away, so you just can't get close enough to actually get some good photographs. But from a vehicle, you can start to capture some images. The other main draw, I'd say, in man of pools is photographing elephants on foot. And in actual fact, in this photograph, you can see an elephant, obviously, but in front of that, you might be able to see some out of focus shapes, and they're actually African wild dogs as well. So you can see that interaction between the two of them. The elephants here are famed for sort of standing up on their hind legs and reaching up high into the canopy. And it makes for some fantastic photography opportunities, particularly when the light is just, well, it's that magical golden hue that you get in sort of, I would say, Southern Africa in particular. It's sort of unlike anywhere else. It's because of the dust in the atmosphere and the smoke from bushfires and things like that. It's a particularly wonderful time. The end of the dry season in particular is the best. And that's when I head out to man of pools. And you really can see the interaction between elephants and wild dogs on quite a regular basis. And I can assure you that elephants do not like wild dogs. I've actually got a series of shots of the elephant attacking these dogs only moments later. So a lot of the photography tours are about time in the right places, but also trying to get that interaction and spending time with one animal or a group of animals to ensure that your photography opportunities are that much better. And if you're wondering how close you can get to elephants on foot in man of pools, you can get extraordinarily close. Here's my group with an elephant tusker. It's very important to say that you can only do this with a very few number of guides that have built up an amazing relationship with these elephants. So please don't think that this is a normal piece of behavior, either from a client's point of view or from an elephant's point of view. But here, you don't even need a high-end camera, you know, an iPhone. Well, it doesn't even do it justice, but it gives you an idea of the intimacy of an encounter such as this. Standing a few meters away from a full-grown bull elephant is one of the most remarkable privileges, and photographs, you know, are very much secondary, but welcome at the same time. But it is really about the wild dogs here for me. Watching them play and watching them hunt is just an experience that you really can't match anywhere else. And following the lives of these dogs on a daily basis for a week is just absolutely incredible. Here again, you can see the dogs are actually on a kill with my clients in the background. And it just is mind-blowing to be able to sort of have this intimacy with a wild predator. And just in case you're wondering how close you can get, these are all taken on a 300 or 500mm lens, to give you an idea, lying on the floor. Here's a video which actually shows you sort of that real intimacy. The dogs are completely unbothered by our presence, going about their business. Here, they're renewing their bonds before going for a hunt. And here, again, they're just sort of playing before they go out. This is only moments later. And this is filmed on a wide angle lens of about 14mm on my camera lens, to give you, on my phone camera, to give you an idea. So you can literally get within 5 yards of a pack of African wild dogs, which is truly exceptional. So very similar to man of pools, but I would say a different photography subject is Zambia's South Luangwa National Park. Hopefully, touch wood, all things going well. I'll be heading out there on Saturday to lead our photographic tours. But it's an amazing place, particularly for leopard, although I know some people haven't had much luck in Luangwa for leopard, but I promise you it's one of the best places in Africa, in the world, to photograph leopards. And normally on a stay, you can get numerous sightings in daylight as well, and you can get some fantastic imagery of all different sort of leopards, not just one or two, but you know, in one day I've seen 7 different leopards in Luangwa, so it's not impossible to capture an amazing portfolio of imagery. What I would say though is that particularly when you're spending a lot of time with subjects, is that you might find that you quite quickly build up, you know, your traditional portraits or animals in the environment shot, things like that. Sometimes look at the finer details as well. So here I was particularly close to this leopard. She was asleep in the tree, literally right next to me. And I only had a 500mm lens or a wide angle lens. And so I actually decided to use the 500mm and just focus on her pads, because, you know, the textures on those pads and the fur around it and the texture of the wood with sort of the dappled spots in the background was just something really quite beautiful, I thought. And it's not just with leopards or, you know, any species, you can do the same thing. And it's the same for lions. And Luangwa, again, is a fantastic place for lions, and particularly for cubs. It's usually very easy to get a whole sort of range of images in a very short time frame, from full frame portraits to sort of playing shots as well. And, you know, one of the great things about being on safari with people and me being able to sort of hopefully talk you through the photographic process, but also get you in the right position working with our local guide, but also position sort of understanding the wildlife behavior as well. But I can also impart my technical knowledge to help you hopefully get the shot that you're after. And I'm always on hand to help, no matter what time, what the trip is. You know, I'll always be there to offer my advice and guidance. And Luangwa is also fantastic for elephants, very different from Manipals, I would say. You don't get the same intimacy with a wide angle lens, but if you're using telephoto work, particularly from vehicles and even from the comfort of the lodge, you can get some absolutely beautiful images of leopards, of elephants, and including sort of, again, you can really concentrate on a specific area and try and get some really beautiful sort of intimate shots, the finer details, whether that be the wrinkles of their skin, the veins behind their ears, or in here, in this particular case, the eyelashes of the elephant. This was actually taken, I think, on a 300mm lens. The elephant walked straight past the vehicle that I was in. So it gives you an idea of the opportunities and how you can be creative on a photographic tour. You don't have to just go for these traditional portraits, action shots or environment shots. But that's not to say that you shouldn't take a beautiful portrait, because when you've got a baby elephant in front of you, when you're sat on the floor of your tent, you know, what can be better than that? That for me is the absolute thrill of being on safari and on any wildlife holiday, really. But of course, there's birds as well here are fantastic, and bird photography opportunities are absolutely phenomenal, whether it be the southern carmine beta colonies such as this. You can play around with them in flight, on the banks, you name it. The red-billed quelias in their thousands, hundreds of thousands in some cases, and playing with backlighting and front lighting. There's always these opportunities. And I always say to someone, if you've missed a shot, don't worry, because there's so many more things on offer. Loads of different hornbills, other beaters, eagles, African fish eagle, you name it, the photographic opportunities really are exceptional. And again, you know, you've got that luxury of going for the traditional sort of portraits, these intimate shots, to these lovely sort of atmospheric shots of animals in their environment. And a fish eagle in a tree such as this, for me, all the different layers of the trees is really quite beautiful. Very simple, but very effective photography too. There are the smaller creatures about as well, and obviously some much larger ones other than the elephants. But this is an elephant shrew, a particular favorite of mine. This one's actually photographed the morning after a rainstorm, and it was out enjoying the first of the morning sun warming up. So again, it just shows you that you never know what to expect. And again, always have your camera with you, because even if you're in your room, you know, you might be visited by vervet monkeys or a herd of elephants, as I said before, and you can be treated to some fantastic photography opportunities. Again, you'll notice I've got down really low, and for me, that's really, really important to help you make the most of those opportunities available. But it is all about the experience of going on safari, and whether that be African wild dogs, hyenas, you know, picking up on carrion, there's always something to photograph, something different, crocodiles and hippos as well. You know, this place is full of life and a wildlife photographer's paradise. And just to finish it off, share with you a very grumpy hippopotamus, sort of enjoying the last of the evening sun whilst wallowing in its muddy hollow. But from here, I'm now going to jump again quite considerably in distance to Australia. And Australia is a place that I hold very dear to my heart. And when most people think of wildlife photography, I think they think of places like maybe Yellowstone National Park, obviously Africa, Kenya's Masai Mara, Tanzania, Serengeti, South Luangwa, Kafue, you know, and then you name it, there's a Kruger as well in South Africa. These places are sort of synonymous with wildlife photography. More so with Europe in recent years, I'd say Northern Europe, the polar regions are particularly popular as well. But for me, Australia is a hidden gem most people overlook. And partly, I think it's because it's so far away, but actually the wildlife here and the wildlife photography opportunities are remarkable. Whether it be some of the oddities, whether it be some of the more sort of familiar species, you name it, everything is on offer. This particular bird in front of you is a frogmouth, a tawny frogmouth. Think of a giant nightjar as probably the best way to put it. They are a real weird creature, sort of halfway actually between a nightjar and an owl is probably the easiest way to put it. And they are nocturnal, particularly weird. They like catching, well, sort of small rodents, insects, amphibians, lizards, you name it, those sorts of things on the forest floor at night. That's why they've got these big beady eyes. And you'll nearly always see them at night, but sometimes during the day as well. But Australia's wildlife for me starts in the back gardens and the parks of cities, because everything there is different from what you get in the rest of the world. Pretty much everything you'll see is endemic or semi-endemic, and whether that be common birds such as the sulphur-crested cockatoo, a beautiful sort of social bird that is seen with absolute ease in everyone's gardens, in parks, in Sydney, you name it, they are everywhere. So the rainbow lorikeet, again, absolutely everywhere, common as muck. But from a photographer's point of view and wildlife lover's point of view, they are just beautiful. And by understanding light and being with someone, again, in the right place at the right time, you can really capture some stunning images. And this is another lorikeet called a scaly-breasted lorikeet. Again, I tried to get down lower to get eye level with the bird. This is actually feeding on a bottle brush bush. And then other really familiar species such as the kookaburra, the laughing kookaburra, that sort of iconic bird of Australia with that sound that is just so recognizable. And you can just see here on its wing, it's got this lovely patch of iridescent blue. And in case you didn't know, the kookaburra is a kingfisher. It's one of the largest kingfishers in the world. And they don't really eat fish. Again, they eat lizards, insects, those sorts of things off the forest floor. The fairy wrens, the superb fairy wren, splendid fairy wren, are incredibly beautiful, and again, relatively common and quite easy to see if you go out looking for them. This is just on a chain link fence to give you an idea. And they have robins there too, not the same as ours, much more like a flycatcher. This is an eastern yellow bush robin, a really beautiful bird, but has the exact same behavior as the robin in the UK, will follow you around as you're walking through a park or a garden, even through sort of just shrubland or scrub, and they'll follow you along and pick up insects as you go. Of course, Australia, I would say, is most famous for its population of marsupials. And I mean, the number and the variety of marsupials is truly astonishing. I can't even begin to do it justice by talking to you today, and photographs don't do them justice, because the sort of the difference in between the species is insane, to be honest. But the most familiar are probably the macropods, the kangaroos and the wallabies. And probably the easiest to see out of all of these is the eastern grey kangaroo, just because they are very familiar with people. They're often found on golf courses. So you name it, you can go out and photograph these beautiful, beautiful animals. And they sort of behave much like a herd of deer, really. They live in mobs, family groups, with a dominant male, and they'll graze all day. And you can get some incredible close encounters, whether you want a telephoto lens to get beautiful portraits, or you can even go with a wide angle lens, as I've done here, and catch them in their environment. And there is so much on offer with just these sort of relatively familiar species. Other members of the family include things like the swamp wallaby here, which is a particularly delicate and very beautiful member of the wallaby family, to the slightly bigger red-necked wallaby, or as they're known in Tasmania, the Bennett's wallaby. And these are very common, very widespread across Eastern Australia, in particular in Southern Australia, but particularly sort of charismatic again, and very different in appearance to the swamp wallaby you saw a moment ago. And another species that's notable is the Tamar wallaby. If anybody's ever gone to Kangaroo Island and seen these tiny little wallabies jumping around, it will be one of these. They're about the size of a cat, maybe a tiny bit bigger, between a cat and a dog. And they're everywhere, but they're particularly charming. And you can just really go to town with your photography. Getting low, again, is always the key. And you'll hear it time and time again when I'm leading or telling people to get down low. And it probably gets very boring, but honestly, it's the best thing to do. And then other sort of species going back up in size again, the western grey kangaroo, which sort of, I'd say, from the west of the Great Dividing Range that goes through sort of the Blue Mountains, that sort of side, to the west of that, and to the north of Melbourne, northwest of Melbourne. From there, you start to get the western grey kangaroos. So they're actually much more widely spread than the eastern greys, but probably not so regularly encountered, and not particularly grey. As you can see, they're actually, for the most part, they're brown with a sort of a grey front to them. And red kangaroos, similarly, aren't for the most part red. It's only the big males that are red, but photographically, you know, an imposing species. You don't want to get too close. I highly recommend you only use long telephoto lenses to photograph these guys, or binoculars to watch them, because they can be very aggressive. To give you an idea, on this picture, the male obviously is the big red guy, and the one to the right is actually a young female. So it gives you an idea of the size difference between the two sort of genders of the species. Really quite amazing, actually, the size between the two sexes. But the males are particularly aggressive, so I would highly recommend you keep your distance at all times, particularly when photographing, because it's very easy to sort of not appreciate how close you are to something when looking through a lens. And sometimes, you know, just put the camera down and enjoy it, because, you know, you'll only see some of these things once in your life. So just absorb every moment you can. And although you want a picture to help you remember, I think the memories that you keep by seeing it with your own two eyes is more important than anything else. Other members of the marsupial family, which are particularly iconic, I suppose, are the wombat, and also the koala as well. And the koala varies greatly from the northeast of Australia all the way down to the southern end. You know, the sort of the appearance of them is really very different indeed. So it's really important to note that, like, if you see a brown koala, it might just be because in that area they are more brown. They're not all grey and sort of short haired. Some of them are quite fluffy as well. So really important. And one of my favourite species of all in Australia, and my favourite to photograph, is the dingo. Much maligned, unfortunately, and much like the wolf across Europe, I suppose, and North America. But they are a beautiful species, incredibly misunderstood, and a critical species in keeping Australia's ecosystems healthy as well. And photographing them here, just to give you an idea, I've used a 300mm lens. I'd actually waited for this dingo. I'd been following her for a couple of days, and actually waited for her to lay down in this beautiful grove of palms. And she just settled, and she just sort of watched the world go by, completely ignoring me, and just got this beautiful moment. Really something that I'll treasure for the rest of my life. It's a real privilege. But Australia has some other particular oddities, I suppose, such as the duck-billed platypus, a platypus as it probably should just be called. You know, I mean, it's a monotreme, which is an egg-laying mammal, and to photograph these guys takes a great deal of patience and luck as well. I mean, this is broad daylight, obviously. Typically, you'll see them at dawn and dusk. You need to find sort of a pool or a river that isn't flowing too quickly, that has pools on it. If it has got sort of rapids, it needs to have some calmer areas. But they're incredibly busy. They'll go around sort of happily for hours at a time feeding before they sort of disappear to their burrows and rest up out of sight. So you have to be lucky, but the photographic opportunities, again, if you're prepared to put in the effort, and particular places in Tasmania and on the mainland itself, you can get some fantastic opportunities to build up some photographs. And the same can be said for this guy. This is a short-beaked echidna, one of my favorite mammals on Earth, otherwise known as a spiny anteater. And again, another egg-laying mammal. And just to be even weirder, their sort of back legs face the wrong way. So they are a particularly odd species. But again, photographing them, if you can get low, get that lovely depth of field, you can really sort of build that intimacy between you and your subject. And for me, that's really important. Australia, again, so much on offer. I could literally talk for hours in Australia, so I'm not going to. I'm going to sort of speed through, but I fell in love with tree frogs in Australia. And here it's all about playing with light, with flash, with torches, and learning how to manipulate light in order to capture different scenes. In that particular previous case, by positioning the flash in a certain way, I was able to get the illumination of the vocal sac cooling, obviously here, but you can also see, hopefully, the legs actually are showing, the front legs are showing through the sac as well. So it's quite an amazing thing to see, from to tiny little sedge frogs, which are the size of your fingernail, to the beautiful red-eyed tree frog, using a torch here to create a perfect, a near perfect reflection on the leaf, except for the red eyes disappearing into the shadows. But it's not just about inland. The coastline as well is amazing, with lapwings and plovers and thick-knees or beach stone curlews, you name it, there's so much on offer. And photographically, if you just take your time, get down low, and the animals usually come to you, whether it be whistling kites as in that previous photograph, ospreys, white-faced herons, or something like the beautiful endemic sooty oyster catcher, really spectacular birds. If you just lay down and spend a bit of time, these things will come to you, and hopefully you eventually get rewarded with a moment that you'll treasure for the rest of your life and capture an image such as this which, you know, you can't help but sort of smile at when you see it on the back of your camera. And that, for me, is what I always want to do when I take people away, is get them the shot that they want, and hopefully they'll sort of cherish that moment and that image for the rest of their lives. I'm also quickly going to sort of jump north to a couple of sort of colder destinations after taking you to the warmth, I suppose, of Africa and Australia. And I'm going to take you to the Arctic, to Svalbard quickly. And then I'm going to end on Japan, and it will only be another sort of 5 minutes or so before we get to the end. So I won't rabbit on too long. But Svalbard is a really wonderful place, not just from an adventure point of view, from a travel point of view, but also from a photography point of view. You don't necessarily need huge telephoto lenses to capture breathtaking imagery. The landscape here is so spectacular that if you zoom out, actually sometimes the images are much more impactful than with a telephoto lens. But I think the go-to is always having that longer lens, whether it be you know, like a big prime lens, or a 100 to 400, or you know, like a Sigma 150 to 600 or something like that. They give you the flexibility, particularly to capture some shots. The great thing about Spitsbergen, Svalbard in particular, is if you want to practice your bird and flight photography, when you're on a ship is a brilliant time indeed, because you can photograph gulls, kittiwakes, guillemots, the occasional skua that will come by as well, long-tailed skua, Pomeranian skua, Arctic skua, you name it, they're all sort of around, and you can really sort of practice that skill. And one of the challenges as well is with snowy backgrounds is getting them exposed correctly, because it's all too easy to get them underexposed or overexposed. And it's the same whether you're going to Wrangel Island or, you know, sort of South Georgia or Antarctica. It's the same thing. It's learning how to manipulate your exposure. And what you quite often will need to do is, when you're focusing on a subject, is ensure that your exposure is actually higher than what the camera recommends. So if it says it's perfectly exposed, if you've got a white background in your sort of through your eyepiece, you'll actually find that when you take the image, it will probably come out grey. And one of the reasons for that is because the camera is trying to create what it thinks is a balanced image. And so unless you've got the spot metering on and you get it exactly on your subject, and you get your focus on the exact spot, you'll find that your images come out quite grey. And the way to sort of sort that out to compensate is to change your exposure compensation. If you're using a evaluative or something like that to capture a scene particularly, then you'll need to adjust that and ensure that you're getting the right exposure. So again, when I'm on tour with people in these places, I'm always happy to sort of help them and get the best out of the situation. But it's not always got a snowy background when you're in the Arctic, or ice as well. You know, you can get down out on the ground, on land, and go on zodiac excursions and things like that. And you can start to capture beautiful images of birds and mammals alike. And whether you're on the ship or on shore, the opportunities are really, really fantastic. And the light levels are always changing as well, which makes a massive difference. I mean, I love close-up portraits. That's probably what I would say my strongest skill set is. But everybody's different. Some people like more artistic shots. Some people just love action and sort of a board stiff of a portrait. But, you know, that's what I do, and everyone's different, and there's no right or wrong. It's all about what you enjoy at the end of the day. And Svalbard's fantastic for that, because it offers so many different opportunities, from these vast landscapes to these beautiful intimate moments with some beautiful mammals, such as this guy. It's a bearded seal. You might be wondering why he's sort of got two colorations. He's losing his winter coat and he's coming into his summer coat. So he's got sort of this patchiness to him, and that lovely big moustache giving him that bearded seal name. Very simple portrait, actually taken with a 600mm focal length. And again here, a walrus, actually a lot of the time photographing walruses, you'll see them sort of out on a beach, much more zoomed out. But, you know, when you get up close and personal to a walrus, you can start to see the texture of the whiskers, of the skin, see the eyes, you know, all the little scars, all of those little things for me all add up. And again, it's always about playing with settings. So I'd been photographing grey phalaropes for the entire time I was in Svalbard, and I'd never really got anything that I was happy with. So I just kept persevering, and over the course of a week, I eventually managed to get some shots that I was really happy with, including this one with lovely clean foregrounds and backgrounds and the bird pin sharp. And it's always a challenge. And the same with polar bears as well. You know, you might find that you get one on an ice and it's slightly obscured, or it's in the water and it's looking the wrong way. But be patient. You never know what might present itself. You might end up with a moment such as this, where a bear hauls itself out beautifully with an amazing backdrop. And whether you're using that wide angle lens or a telephoto lens, you know that the photographic opportunity is second to none. And I always remember what my guide said to me when I took this, and he said, now that is a quality bear. And it certainly was. And the photography opportunities sort of always come down to what the species does, the subject does, really, at the end of the day. You know, without their cooperation, you're a mere spectator, and that's part of the fun of it, is that challenge. And as I said, wide angle lenses to capture the environment and the wildlife within that environment is just so important. So I'm going to end on Japan. And Japan is a place that I think maybe a lot of people don't think about initially for a photography tour. And it's certainly got some challenges. I guess culturally it's so different, for one, but it is honestly one of the most incredible experiences. If you want to go somewhere different for a photography tour, I can't really recommend Japan highly enough. It's actually one of the last trips I got to do before COVID hit last year, amazingly. It's actually one of the trips I can say I led last year. And whether it be photographing the Japanese cranes, which are just the most elegant and beautiful birds, you know, they are just remarkable, whether they're in flight or they're displaying to one another. You know, you can just build up such a wonderful array of imagery. And the people in Japan are so wonderful too, that everything is just a joy to behold. It's also a fantastic place to see Euro owls as well. Some people get brilliant encounters with the red fox. I personally didn't have any. But for me, the absolute highlight is going up to the far northeast of Hokkaido. The cranes are on Hokkaido, by the way, as are the Euro owls. But going up to the far northeast of Hokkaido and going to an amazing place called Rausu. And from here, going out on dedicated boat trips to photograph white-tailed eagles and Steller seagulls. It's the best eagle photography I have ever done in my life. And the numbers are just breathtaking. You cannot believe it. And hopefully you'll get the sea ice too, which just adds another element to your photography. Getting them on the ice is just such a treat and something you don't see every day. And seeing the birds together as well, the white-tailed eagles with the Steller seagull, it is really quite remarkable. Hopefully you'll get them resting on ice floes such as this. And hopefully, if you're really lucky, you might even get the snow coming in as well, which I was lucky to on this time. Ideally, we always try and go out for sunrise. It depends on the weather, obviously, as to whether you get those beautiful pink tones. On the days I went, it was a very blue tone, but it still lends itself to some fantastic photography opportunities, close-up portraits such as this. And, you know, sorry, I'll go back, such as this. And it just is honestly, I don't have the words to do it justice. Being so close to such large birds of prey and being able to capture such remarkable sort of portraits and action shots is just wonderful. And Hokkaido has so much more on offer as well, from something like the Japanese pygmy woodpecker, which is just charming, sort of the size of a sparrow, like absolutely beautiful bird, to Japanese sable, a member of the mustelid family, and to the white-tailed eagles of Lake Furen. You know, there is just endless opportunities, and whooper swans as well. And the red-crowned cranes are all over the place, the Japanese cranes. It really is just a photographer's paradise. And we end up by heading back down to Tokyo and then catching the bullet train, which in itself is a fantastic experience, up to Nagano. And from Nagano, we go and visit the snow monkeys, sort of those world famous snow monkeys. And we watch them play in the pools and sort of search for food in the snow. And it's a very different experience, Japan, and it really is. But it is something that I really recommend to everybody, because it is just unlike anything else. And the culture and the food, it all adds up for a truly remarkable trip indeed. So I'm going to finish here. And if you have any questions at all, we would love to hear from you. We'll do our very best to answer as many of them as possible, whether they be specific photography questions or about the tours themselves. And do take part in the poll. You know, we'd really love to know what you're interested in, because it helps us as well. So we'd really love to hear your feedback. But yeah, thank you so much for listening. Thanks for putting up with my sort of sporadic jump from one place to another and then back again. So yeah, thank you very much. And yeah, we'll try and go through your questions.
Right, that was outstanding, mate. Really well done. As you said, like quite a diverse range of destinations and stuff, but some of those photos are just absolutely fabulous, mate. And a few ones in there as well that I haven't seen previously. I don't know if you've snuck some more slides in there, but just
I like to mix it up a bit.
Yeah. Just on Japan at the end there, as you know, I've been up on Sky for the last few weeks, and you know, I've just been desperate just to get some views of white-tailed eagle. You know, even scope views and at distance, and you forget just how immense like Japan is for photography and for those sightings. You know, you can literally have dozens of eagles around you at one time, can't you? Both Stellers, sea eagle, and whitetail.
I think I had over 80 at one point, to give you an idea.
It is such a special thing. I think I'd probably put it in my top 5 wildlife experiences. I think, you know,
it's pretty amazing.
Years ago now, but just nothing kind of prepares you for it. When you go out and you get the morning light as well on the ice, it's a fabulous place. Yeah,
it's a very special place.
Photography, but just to experience it. I'm not a photographer, but I was from ear to ear. It was amazing. Bret, we've had some lovely comments tonight. Lots of people commenting on your fabulous images, and we've got some brilliant questions as well. So I should probably get started on those, but shall we just launch the poll as well?
Yes, go for it.
This earlier, guys, but what we've got here is a list of the trips which Bret has featured tonight. I think you're leading pretty much all of these trips, aren't you? And you've obviously got first-hand all of them. They're all very different and very special in their own way. But yeah, if you'd like any more information on those, do just click on the respective trips, and we'll send you that information in the next day or two. Shall I crack on with some of these questions, Bret? Should we get started?
Yeah, go for it.
We've got Paul Cottis, good old Paul. He has asked a simple wildlife photography question, apparently. And that's with regard to photographing polar bear, or indeed perhaps mountain hare or something like that in a snowstorm. And what exposure would you use? Is there straightforward?
Well, it's straightforward in the sense that, as with anything in photography, I'd say there's no right or wrong way. But I mean, it depends what you want. And it really does. It's really hard to give a definitive answer in terms of exposure, because it depends if you've got a still subject like a mountain hare that isn't going to move, for example. And, you know, they like to hunker sort of away. And if you've got a snowstorm blowing through and you want to sort of capture the drama, maybe you want a slow shutter speed and you get the lovely blur of all the snow sort of swirling around with the hair staying motionless, because that's what they do, luckily. If it's something like a polar bear, the chances are it's probably not going to stay still. So you're going to need something faster. So you're probably going to have to go for something where you're going to get the snow still rather than this nice sort of blurry effect. So then you're going to need something of a shutter speed probably over 1,000th of a second, realistically. It all depends on the light available as well. So that's the thing with photography. There's so many parameters that have to come together before you can say what you can do as an exposure. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of important to know whether it's what you're going for, whether it's arty or kind of thing. But the key thing is to make sure that you don't get those mid-tone greys with the snow, because it's all too easy to take a picture and actually when you get them back on the computer, they look miserably dull and grey and horrible. I think, like we've discussed in the past, like it depends as well, even what the weather's like, because you can get a snowstorm where it's beautifully sunny, weirdly, so behind you, so you get lovely light, but there's a snowstorm in front of you. Or you could be like in deep, dark, ominous clouds with heavy snowflakes, you know, so you just don't know. There's no sort of one rule.
Yeah, sure. I guess the key thing, Bret, is to experiment, isn't it, really? Before the main event, you know, and to take that time. And I guess that's the case in any situation, really, is...
and I think that's always, like, what I always say to people on photography tours is, like, don't be disheartened if you don't get the photograph. Like, at the end of the day, everyone makes mistakes, for one. Like, I still get images wrong, you know, my exposures aren't always perfect, but know what I'm going to do, but it doesn't mean I'm going to get it right first time. So just because you have got it right first time, just look at your camera. You can check your histogram if people are into that sort of thing, and you can start to work out whether you've got a decent exposure or not quite quickly, and then you can adjust accordingly, basically.
And I guess if you're in the bush, you can, or wherever, you can practice on something more common, something like an impala or something like that, the movement of that, so that when something like predator or whatever does come along and there's that opportunity,
that's exactly it. Yeah.
Experience. Good. You also made the point that on getting down low, how did you get back up? Were you helping back up?
Well, normally you have a Bret there, to act as a lever point. Yeah, so I'm quite well practiced at that these days.
Yeah, just go around and pick everybody up, and
I'm also very good at carrying bags whilst people are trying to. So,
good man. Bret, we've got another question here. Elaine asked, what camera do you actually use personally?
It's a very good question. I have quite a few cameras. I have two primary choices. I have a Canon EOS 1DX2. I don't have the 3 because I didn't think it was worth the extra money. And then I have a Canon EOS 5D Mark IV. And then I use a 500mm, 300mm lens, or a 70 to 200mm for most of my stuff. So.
Thank you, Bret. That's pretty straightforward, that one. I mean, that does actually kind of bring us on to another question, which Emily has asked. And what equipment do you need? I mean, do you need the fancy gear, the expensive gear, or can you go out with, anything,
So to give you an idea on my trips, it varies massively. I get obviously some people that have invested very heavily in camera gear. To be honest, from my point of view, unless you're doing it as a professional or a very, very serious amateur, most people do not need big prime 600mm lenses with the very best full frame cameras. It's really, I mean, if you can have it and you want it, then obviously do it, but you don't need that. If like mirrorless cameras these days are unbelievable. And the lens choices, something like a 100 to 400 or a 200 to 500 or something like that is fantastic because it gives you so much flexibility. But some people even come on our tours with bridge cameras, even iPhones. You can take some amazing pictures on an iPhone or Android if that's your preference.
People aren't going to be laughed off a tour if they turn up.
No, not at all. I mean,
the principles are still the same, aren't they? This is
exactly it. Yeah, that's exactly it. And I always say to people, like, the best thing to do is start off with something smaller that you're more comfortable with, that's easy to operate, master that, and then once you've mastered it, okay, maybe if you think you're finding your limit, then you move on. But you don't need the best best equipment to get the best photographs. I still print some images that I took on my very first digital camera. So, it just shows you, like, sometimes you'll take a nice picture. It doesn't matter what equipment you've got.
This leads on something else, actually, Bret, which Gil has just raised, and that's one of the challenges with photography trips is baggage allowance, some of the smaller aircraft. I know that on a lot of photography trips where we're taking a light aircraft, we will buy an extra seat to allow for that. But often there isn't that opportunity, and so you do have to make do with a smaller amount of hand baggage. Obviously, there's ways around that, which we can discuss, but also a lot of people are moving away from that heavier gear and traveling with the lighter stuff and the bridge cameras and stuff and getting some fantastic results. So
yeah, they are. I mean, lots and lots of people are using much lighter weight kit, particularly like Micro Four Thirds. Like Olympus have some really good systems of Micro Four Thirds, and the benefit there is you only need a 300mm lens to get the equivalent of a 600mm focal length. So you get like double the focal length from a much smaller lens. Is the theory. The only time they really suffer is in low light because of the way that the sensor works. But I mean, that's getting nerdy. But yeah, for the most part, actually with modern camera gear, unless you've got these big prime lenses, you're okay. I would suggest you buy like a dedicated camera bag because it just protects it on the plane. Take your laptop with you if you can, because it means you can back up all your images. That's really important. But if you're like me and you have far too much camera gear, and there are many of us out there, there are some really good tricks, which I will be hopefully employing on Saturday. because my weight limit, hand luggage limit, everybody, is 7 kilos, and my bag usually weighs between 15 and 25 kilos, to give you an idea. So I have to somehow get that into 7 kilos, which is never going to happen in a million years. So what I do is I take a waterproof, and I'm particularly sad when I bought my waterproof, I took along my 70 to 200mm lens, and I tried it in every single pocket of every single waterproof until I found one that fitted. And that's why I bought the waterproof I bought, not because I wanted it, but because it fitted my.
So you're going to be wearing that on the plane?
No, I won't wear it on the plane. So what I do is when I go trekking, you see, my jacket probably weighs about 15 kilos. I wrap it up and I put it, you know, like you get luggage trolleys and then they have that basket on it. I wrap it up and I put it in there, and I quite often put like my 500mm lens wrapped up in the jacket. Yeah. So it saves another like 4 kilos of weight from the bag. And then what I do is I have all my paperwork in my laptop like case. And so that when they want to see the paperwork, I take my laptop out of the bag, and then they go, "Oh, can we weigh your bag, please?" And I go, "Of course." And then when they weigh it, it weighs 6.5 kilos. And then I walk around the corner and put everything in, and it weighs 20 kilos. And then if I see them weighing bags before you get on the plane, I go through the process again and I decant everything and sort of.
Let's hope that none of the airlines are listening tonight, Bret, or for that matter.
the other trick that I got told, which was by an Australian official, was they're very strict on the hand luggage in Australia, and he was telling me that if my bag was overweight, I could actually get fined, and you know, you can get, it's quite a bad thing in Australia. It's quite a lot of money. And he said, "How much money do you have?" I said, "Well, not enough to pay a fine." He said, "Well, from my point of view, a big camera lens is a very big piece of jewelry. You know, it's an expensive necklace. So just wear it around your neck. And, you know, what are they going to do? Because how can they justify it isn't a piece of jewelry?" So there are always ways around it. And my absolute final go-to, which is my absolute favorite if people kick up a stink, is just say that your camera has an unremovable, that makes sense. You cannot remove the lithium-ion battery from your camera, because under international aviation law, you cannot put lithium-ion batteries in the hold.
Right.
So what are they going to do? Like,
yeah. Let's hope this works on this Saturday when you fly out.
Well, it worked last time, so hopefully
we don't get pulled up on that. No, I'm sure it'll be good. Bret, thank you for those. They're really handy tips. I'm sure a lot of people adopting them. A quick question here, and a very good one, which we get quite often. What is the difference between just a normal wildlife group and a photography trip?
It's, from my point of view, it's pretty straightforward. I would say a normal wildlife trip, you're trying to see as much as you can for the most part. Not always, it depends. But, you know, like most people want to try and see as much as they can whilst they're there, obviously, which is possible. But the problem with that is, for example, if you go to see a leopard, you know, after 10 minutes, a lot of people will be like, "Okay, I've seen the leopard. Let's go and see the lion that's a mile down the road or something." Whereas from my point of view, as a photography tour, when you find a leopard, you go, "Okay, well, look, the light's going to get in like an hour. The leopard at the moment, the likelihood is as the light starts to drop, the leopard's going to become more active. So let's stick with the leopard and just watch it and see what happens." And so I would say wildlife photography tours, for the most part, are about spending time in one place, whether that be one lodge or one sighting, or, you know, sometimes you have to move around. It's the way it works. But if you get to a sighting, you don't just rush off to try and see the next thing. It's about spending that time. And, you know, it might be 4 hours with one cheetah, for example, in the Serengeti or the Mara or wherever. But you might see it from when it was asleep to when it has made a kill. And you photograph that whole sequence. And that, for me, is the most amazing thing of a wildlife photography tour, is you kind of get a more intimate experience, perhaps, than some other wildlife trips.
Yeah, I think it is a good point. Yeah.
It is all about enabling you to get the images, obviously, and the only way to do that is by spending the time
in the field. Yeah.
I
think that's a very valid point. And when we're setting these trips up, we always look to do that with the photography ones. And I think what we've seen, just from my personal experience in the last few years, is we are starting to see even the normal kind of wildlife trips move in that direction.
No, absolutely.
Spend longer in one place, a more kind of immersive experience, and not around quite so much.
No, absolutely. Yeah,
you know,
I would say as well, I do get, I think it's really important, I quite often will get like one photographer on a trip and their partner isn't a photographer, and they will ask me whether they're suited to it. And I would say 50% of my clients are, for the most part, one of them is really like into photography or interested in photography, and the other one's sort of indifferent.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter at all, because you still get to see everything. And actually, quite often it's the people that aren't photographing that go, by the way, did you realize that over there's another leopard? And you go, no, I didn't know that. Thanks very much. So actually, we very much like having them along. It's very nice. So
no, it's fabulous. As long as you've got the patience and you're happy there to sit back and
that's it.
Yeah, you know, and just take it all in, then it actually works very well. No,
yeah.
Good point, Brett. It was a good one. I've got a question actually, which I noted down as well earlier. I wanted to just ask you what your favourite destination was for photography. Could you single out one destination, if you could just have one trip, you know, that you could do for the rest of your life or something like that, or one destination that you could visit?
It's so hard. I mean, there are just so many places to go. I mean, I'm a sucker for Africa. I like, you know how people say it gets in your blood and blah blah blah. I'm one of those people. If someone said to me tomorrow, well, I am almost going to Africa tomorrow, so that's a pretty stupid thing to say, but you know, like
if you could go anywhere tomorrow, where would it be?
Yeah, I that would sort of be the first place that comes to mind, whether that be, you know, South Luangwa or Lower Zambezi, or I don't know, Manipur, or even Kenya, or, you know, like Tanzania. Any of those places, there's just something for me that's magical about being out in the bush and photographing those species. And I mean, my absolute favorite animal in the world is African wild dog, so that all probably sways it for me, because those experiences photographing the wild dogs in Manipurs that you saw earlier, you literally can't have a better wildlife photography experience than lying on the floor 4 meters away from a wild predator. You know, like, I mean, wildlife photography is literally, that's the stuff you dream of. It's not often that you have to say, like, I actually need to move away from a wild dog to get a picture, you know.
That's crazy. I mean, that is really quite unique, isn't it, what the experience you get there? But I know what you mean. I think we can all relate to that. My default position is always Botswana.
Well, yeah, exactly.
My wife will often say to each other, you know, if you could wake up anywhere tomorrow, where would it be? And mine is always Botswana.
I mean, I love Bots as well. So yeah.
On your background photo there, so taking us back to Finland, Neil has asked, are midges a problem out there?
So I mean, this is a really, really hard one, because the way that you don't really get midges, you get mosquitoes. That's the first thing to say, and that's because you don't get the same exposed soil type that you do up in Scotland, which is why you get midges. Again, nerdy fact. But you get a huge amounts of mosquitoes because of standing water at certain times, and it's really, really hard to predict what those times are, because it all depends on when the first snow melts, and you get multiple mosquito populations in a year. So you can't just say like June is a good time to go because you don't get mosquitoes, because if the snow doesn't melt until the last week in May, you might get a huge population in June and then almost none in July, and then another huge population, you know, not that accurate, but you know, along those lines. So yes, you do get mosquitoes. As to how many there are and if they're a problem, it's almost impossible to say in advance, unfortunately. I've had years where it's been lovely and I've had 1 or 2 mosquitoes like pestering me, and then I've been before where I've had like 50 to 60, but I would say I've had a lot more than I've had loads, if that makes sense.
The hides are generally pretty, once you're in there.
Oh yeah, once you're in the hides, you're okay.
You then deal with the ones which are present, whatever way you wish, and then the problem is done. Yeah.
You have a bloodletting session. That's probably the best. It's the only animal that I
them out, or you just destroy them.
It's the only animal I don't hesitate to dispose of. Is probably the best way to put it.
No, they can be annoying. They can be relentless, can't they? But no, I was out there when I mean, you ranted about Finland for years and you know, talked me into going out there, and I have to admit it was absolutely brilliant. You know, couldn't fault it, and to see wolverine and bear, as you suggested was possible in one night, is just insane. But we had about 35 degree heat when we were out there. It was unbelievable.
I know, isn't it? I remember.
Yeah, so those hides were so hot. It was
But you see, I've been there when it was like -5, so you never know.
But both equally challenging.
A Finnish summer is a varied affair.
It is. It really is. I've got loads of questions here, Brett. I keep stopping, but Elaine has also asked, how do you get the in flight so clear? She tries to photograph the red kites quite frequently and struggles to get them in focus. Is there a simple answer to that?
No.
No.
You need a really fast shutter speed, for one. It is the most obvious one. And with your aperture, you don't want the widest aperture. So you don't want the lowest number, which is usually like f4 or f5.6 or something, or f6.3. What you normally want to do is go to something like f8, and it gives you slightly more depth of field so that you've got a better chance of getting it in focus. And then the only other thing is just to take thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of photographs. Yeah, and someone's just asked whether photograph. Oh, you're answering now.
I am, yeah. Yeah, where the photos of the elephants were taken.
Yeah.
Here on the screen. That's obviously South Luangwa.
It's South Luangwa, yeah. It's taken in 2019.
2019, cool. Rawlings has asked, do you use auto white balance?
No, I don't. I always use my own concoctions. Primarily, I use a custom cloudy white balance, or I use sunshine, depending on how horrifically bright it is. Very rarely do I use auto white balance.
Right, I'm going to wrap things up now with one final question, Brett, which is from Mary Spence, and she said,
"Yep.
How much concentration is there on photography and spending time with subjects versus covering a specific itinerary?"
It depends on the tour, I'd say. So something like Zambia, for example, we go to a lodge for an entire week, so there isn't really an itinerary as such. So what we normally do is for the first few days, for example, we go out and find what we can find. And then hopefully people have built up an amazing array of imagery. And then if there's something that people want to focus on as a group, I usually am sort of the executor of the sort of democratic process. So I'll then say, okay, well, today let's do this, tomorrow let's do this, and I'll work with the local guides. And photography, obviously, on a photography tour is the primary focus. Doesn't, like we said before, it doesn't mean that you can't just go and enjoy it, because you can. And when you're on a night drive, for example, photography kind of takes a little bit of a backseat. You can still do it, but it's obviously not the primary focus. Whereas when you're doing something like Japan, or, you know, just because of where things are, you have to travel between them. And whether you're doing a photography tour or a normal wildlife tour, it doesn't really matter. If you want to get pictures or the sightings of those species, you are going to have to travel. But always, I would say, do our absolute utmost to give you as much time as possible in the field. That's the key with any wildlife holiday, but particularly with photography holidays. Yeah,
good man. Brett, this has been super, mate. Lots and lots of nice comments, which I'll let you read afterwards. They're all in the forum there. But
no
we'll let these good people get on with their evenings. Thank you ever so much for joining us. It's been a really enjoyable evening from our perspective. Very grateful for your attendance. Brett, super talk. Well done, mate. If you have any questions, apologise, but we'll come back to you in the next day or two, as we will with those travel plans as well. So thanks ever so much, guys. Have a good evening, and
thank you.
See you soon.
Cheers. Bye-bye.